There is a plant that grew in the desert long before sugar existed. For thousands of years it kept entire peoples healthy in a land where nothing else could survive. Then, in a single decade, it was erased from medicine, cleared from the land, and replaced with something that made the world sick. But the roots went deeper than anyone guessed, and beneath the soil, something was waiting. This is the story of mesquite, the tree that sweetened life before sugar existed, and the plant that doctors quietly buried when there was money to be made from your illness instead. Welcome to Forgotten Plant Remedies. If forgotten knowledge matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. The archive opens in a laboratory in New Mexico, 1923. A botanist named Forrest Shreve is grinding mesquite pods into a fine powder. He is not making bread, he is testing a hypothesis, that the desert's oldest sweetener might be medicine. His notes, filed with the Carnegie Institution, described something remarkable. Test subjects consuming mesquite flour showed stable blood glucose for hours after eating. No spike, no crash. The body processed it slowly, almost gently, as if it recognized the molecule from somewhere ancient. Shreve wrote 2 words in the margin of his report: natural insulin. 2 years later, Eli Lilly launched commercial insulin production. Within a decade, diabetes treatment became a licensed, patentable industry worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Shreve's notes were not suppressed, they were simply never followed up. In science, silence is its own kind of burial. The tree had been doing this for thousands of years before anyone wrote it down. In the Sonoran Desert, the Tohono O'odham people had no word for diabetes, not because the disease did not exist, but because their diet made it impossible. For centuries, mesquite pods were their primary sweetener. Ground into flour, mixed into porridge, fermented into a drink called tiswin. Every meal carried the tree's slow-release sugars into the body. Elders described the flour as something that gave energy without restlessness. Children grew on it. The elderly maintained their strength into late age. There was no epidemic of fatigue, no cycle of hunger and crash that returned an hour after eating. The body stayed level, steady, fed in a way that processed food has never managed to replicate. Researchers from Arizona State University studied Tohono O'odham health records in 1983 and found something that stopped them cold. Communities that had abandoned traditional mesquite foods in favor of processed sugar showed diabetes rates of 50%. Those who kept the old diet, under 4%. The number was not a coincidence, it was a confession. But here is where the story gets darker. By the time those numbers were published, the American food industry had already spent 40 years building the opposite system. In 1944, the USDA classified mesquite as an invasive weed and launched eradication programs across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Millions of dollars, aerial spraying, mechanical removal, government contractors moving across the land with equipment designed specifically to destroy root systems that ran 200 feet deep. They called it rangeland management. But the timing is impossible to ignore. The same decade that processed sugar became the foundation of the American diet was the same decade the government declared war on the one plant that could have replaced it. Mesquite did not fit the system. It could not be patented. It grew freely in land no corporation owned. Its sweetness could not be metered, bottled, or branded. A tree that anyone could harvest from public land was a tree no one could profit from controlling. So it was called a weed, and the country was told to eat sugar instead. What followed was not accidental. The food industry lobbied for sugar subsidies. School lunch programs were built around refined carbohydrates. Nutrition guidelines written in the 1950s and 1960s, many of them shaped by industry-funded research, placed sugar at the center of the recommended diet. The alternative, a tree growing freely in the desert, was never put to a committee. It was never studied for a program. It had simply been cleared from the land before anyone thought to ask what it was for. The plant, of course, did not comply. You cannot eradicate mesquite. The USDA finally admitted this in 1948, after spending 8 years trying. Cut to the ground, it returns. Burned to ash, the roots survive. Poisoned with herbicide, new shoots emerge within weeks. 10 new growth points for every trunk removed. Teams returned to the same fields season after season, spending more money each year, finding the same trees growing back in the same places. The roots had been there before the fence lines, before the railroads, before any map of the territory existed. They were not going to leave because a government program told them to. The desert floor remembers what was planted there, and it refuses to forget. By the 1990s, the human cost of the other choice had become undeniable. Global sugar consumption had crossed 120 million tons annually. Type 2 diabetes cases in the United States tripled between 1980 and 2000. The medical system responded with more pharmaceuticals, metformin, sulfonylureas, GLP-1 agonists, each one managing the disease that the food system had built, each one requiring a lifetime of prescriptions, each one generating revenue that a wild desert tree never could. Think about what that means for a moment. The disease and its treatment became two parts of the same economy. The food system created the condition, the pharmaceutical system sold the management. And somewhere in the desert, the tree that might have interrupted that cycle was still growing back from its roots, quiet and unhurried, waiting for someone to remember why it mattered. Then in 2005, a research team at the University of Arizona published a paper that brought Shreve's 1923 margin note back into focus. They had isolated the precise compound responsible for mesquite's effect on blood glucose, fructooligosaccharides, long-chain plant sugars that bypass standard glucose metabolism entirely. Instead of entering the bloodstream and triggering insulin, they feed gut bacteria directly, acting as a prebiotic rather than a sugar. The glycemic index of mesquite flour, 25. Table sugar, 65. White bread, 71. One team member told the Arizona Daily Star, "We are not discovering something new, we are rediscovering something old." The rediscovery did not come from labs alone, it came from memory. In 2009, a Tohono O'odham elder named Raymond Antone began documenting traditional mesquite preparation methods that existed nowhere in academic literature. He had learned them from his grandmother, who had learned them from hers. The knowledge had travelled in mouths, not books. Antone spent 4 years working with food historians and ethnobotanists to record 23 distinct preparation methods: flour milling, pod fermentation, seed roasting, none of which had been published in any scientific journal. Some of those methods produced mesquite concentrates with glucose response profiles more stable than any pharmaceutical blood sugar supplement on the market. The knowledge was never lost. It had simply been waiting for someone to ask the right people. By 2015, the conversation had shifted permanently. Functional medicine practitioners began recommending mesquite flour as a sugar replacement for pre-diabetic patients. Clinical nutritionist research, published in the Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry, confirmed what Antone's grandmother already knew. Regular mesquite consumption measurably reduced fasting blood glucose levels over 12 weeks. Prices followed. By 2018, certified organic mesquite flour retailed at $22 per pound in American health stores. The same tree the government had spent millions to destroy was now generating a market worth tens of millions to harvest. The USDA had spent $400 million on mesquite eradication programs between 1944 and 1980, according to land management records. That figure has never been formally acknowledged. The programs were quietly discontinued. Today, the picture is coming fully into focus. The World Health Organization reports that 537 million adults are currently living with diabetes. Projections for 2045 suggest that number will reach 783 million. The pharmaceutical market for diabetes management generates over $50 billion annually. And in the desert of the American Southwest, of Argentina, of India and Kenya and Northern Africa, a tree with roots 200 feet deep grows freely without irrigation, produces a fruit with a glycemic index of 25, and has been doing so for 4,000 years. NASA researchers studying sustainable food crops noted in 2021 that the mesquite tree is among the most resilient food sources on Earth. One researcher wrote in a report to the Food and Agriculture Organization, The answer to tomorrow's metabolic crisis may already be growing in the soil. The tree was never gone. The knowledge was never destroyed. It lived in the hands of people who never stopped using it, in seeds passed down through generations, in preparation methods carried in memory when they could not be carried in books. What the industry cleared from the land kept growing back. What medicine forgot, grandmothers remembered. What was buried in silence for a century is now being spoken again, one harvest at a time. The answers were always here, waiting in the desert, waiting in the roots, waiting for someone to remember that healing was never supposed to cost this much. This knowledge is not lost. It is waiting for you to find it. If this mattered to you, subscribe to Forgotten Plant Remedies and hit the bell. Share this with someone who deserves to remember. The next vault opens soon.